the Shakti Punch. I am your host, Pranav. Namaste, Pranam Alaikum. On this show, we go together hand in hand on a cosmic voyage to unravel the true nature of reality through a dharmic, Indic lens, talking divinity, reality, praxis, mythology, the tools of the trade, moksha, liberation. So happy you could join me today. Here with my co-host / producer, Adi Parige.
Hey.
Adi, you know, we reached 500 now, 500 and change now on Instagram. There is supposed to be a face reveal. Technically, I don't know if you're up for that or not yet. Maybe we're changing the goalposts, guys. Maybe 1,000 now on YouTube. If you want the other half, we got to get to 1,000 on YouTube. Guys, don't forget, we've got a Patreon. You can support us. We have a very cheap. We know Desis, we're all cheap out here. Conjuice people out here. We have $1.08. Hello. We already know 108, the big number. If you want to just support us and our production efforts here, we would super appreciate that. We also got a higher level tier as well. We do hope to be, and we will for sure be building out the Patreon, producing extra content for you guys. But in the meantime, any support you can offer would be great. Also, subscribe to us on YouTube. Any bit helps. Remember to like, comment, share. Everything that you can do really helps. Thank you so much for your support as of now. The podcast has grown very quickly in ways that, you know, we would not have anticipated, and we are so grateful for your support.
We're super motivated as well. Thank you.
Super motivated. Just right off the top, time on the clock is 426,875 years, 145 days, 5 hours, 33 minutes until the ball drops and the end of Kali Yuga comes. The man on the white horse or woman shows up, brings all this to an end, the cosmic dissolution. Although the more and more I've been reading Yoga Vashishta, I'm like, hey, it doesn't matter. Moksha, no moksha, liberation. Actually, none of it matters. You know, Advaita is a benign, nihilistic view of reality, actually. It's really there. It's a very positivist view in the sense that it's really just telling us what it is. And for me, and we're going to get into it later, Tantra is really where we get to put Advaita into practice. And there are other practices as well. We're going to be, to me, this is a very fun episode because we're actually going to be talking a little bit about Bhakti as well. But before we get into all that, I want to talk about a controversy now that's kind of befallen the Hindu community in India, especially. Adi, I know you can speak to this in a big way as an Andhra boy, right? As a Telugu guy. Tirumala, Tirupati, a huge temple, right? To Tirupati Balaji, the Prasadam there, the Laddoos there. We have some poison Laddoos, guys, that have beef fat, which that is the most out-of-pocket shit imaginable. They've got beef fat, which is, okay, fish sauce or fish oil.
Fish sauce might have given it some umami, but no.
We don't want the umami in it. We want sweet laddoos, okay? And lard as well, which to me is unthinkable. And look, here's the thing about Tirupati Balaji and what I call the SV temples, right? The Shri Venkateshwar temples, right? Yeah. Is, as far as I'm concerned, north to south, this is a pan-Hindu issue, right? There's a lot of people who like to be very regionalist about it. I'm a North Indian guy. But for me and my family growing up in central Pennsylvania, it was of the utmost importance that at least once a year, we had our own local Hindu, you know, Radha Krishna temple or whatever it was, right? Sitaram Radha Krishna Hari temple that we had where I grew up near Harrisburg, Pennsylvania. But for my family growing up, it was of the utmost importance every year that we go and visit the Tirupati Balaji SV temple in Pittsburgh. I think that was the first one in the United States. Yeah. And we would every year we would take the 4.5-hour drive, spend a whole day there. Very important to us as a family, as a Hindu family.
Shout out their tamarind rice.
Shout out the tamarind rice, the yogurt rice, the lemon rice. I mean, incredible canteen, of course. We would come back with just stacks and stacks and stacks of these styrofoam containers filled with all the delicious canteen food that we would get there. And what was amazing about that temple is that it became its own little mini, not exactly a Tirumala, right? Because not all the other temples that sprouted up there were South Indian temples, but after that, a Hindu Jain temple popped up. After that, a Sai Baba temple popped up, and it became just a full-on pilgrimage site. Yeah. And that's the thing about Dharma, right? It is a pan-Indian, pan-South Asian phenomenon. Right? Yeah. Like you're going there to do all of it. It doesn't matter if they're speaking Tamil or Telugu or whatever it is. We're going there. We're showing our devotions. and receiving the darshana, you know what I mean? And it was so important. So it was important to me. I was shocked by it. And I don't know. I mean, the issue to me is it's a very complicated issue, right? Because it's immediately become politicized there. Yeah. Right. This government is now blaming the last government for doing it. Right. The TDD, Tirumala Tirupati Devastanam. Right. Is the corporation or organization that administers the temple, and they're very much controlled by the government of Andhra. Right.
Or you could say, some might argue that TTD has a lot of say, regardless of the government of Andhra.
Okay.
As well.
Either way, we see all the problems that come with governance in India in general, 100%. Right? Graft, incompetence, corruption. Basically, what is it? They skimped on the good ghee, the ghee from Karnataka, the Nandini ghee.
Yes.
And
they went for some crappy ghee.
They went for some shit ghee, basically. And what happens? It's dharambrasht, you know what I mean? It was completely just totally out of pocket. And really something that is sacrilegious. And we don't talk about a sacrilege a lot as Hindus, but this is a sacrilege, right? Using any kind of animal fat that's made from the death of animals is a huge sacrilege, right?
I think the way I would at least see it is that, for me, who is a Hindu, depending on what they eat, it doesn't actually change their Hinduness. But to enforce or to essentially, con people into eating foods that are obviously not seen as holy.
Yes.
And on top of that, fats, so they're kind of hidden in there.
Exactly.
The idea of any of my family members who are vegetarian eating that, it breaks my heart.
Yeah, it really does. Because and all of Tirumala is supposed to be a very strictly vegetarian city as well.
Completely vegetarian.
Right? Completely vegetarian. Yeah. Obviously no alcohol, no tobacco. I can't be popping in there with the Zins. No. You know what I mean? If I'm going to do that seven hill hike, I got to go Zinless on that, you know? And to me, I guess my question is, and this is a broader question about Hindu temples in India especially, is why does the government control any Hindu temple? It's a supposedly secular country, yet the only religious institutions which are controlled by the government are Hindu temples. And to me, it kind of speaks to that as a broader issue. Maybe we need to liberate the temples entirely and allow them to stay in the hands of private trusts of devotees. Now, Adi, I don't know how you feel about this.
I really don't know, because a lot of South Indian temples, and we're talking about ancient temples here, right? It's an archaeologist's nightmare and blessing in a way, because we've been building upon these holy sites for God knows how long, right?
Millennia.
And what comes with that is a lot of treasure. And that's the word. Right. There's the Padmanabha Swami temple has treasures.
Treasures upon treasures.
That's why there's soldiers with the AK-47 standing outside of it, right? Yeah. And likewise, Tirumala, I want to say, is the richest temple complex in India. Yeah. And see, this is where it gets complicated, and I don't know enough about governance in India, and I try to actually really know less and less as every day I get older. But Tirumala itself is a city within Tirupati, right? So Tirumala is the city on top of the 7 hills.
Yes.
And so I can understand from that point why there might need to be a level of governance, right? Because you're running a town. There are restaurants and stores and people.
Yeah,
and
it is a municipality.
And then at the center of this is obviously the Balaji Murti that has humongous process around just doing darshanam. Yeah. There's an entire ticket system. It's super well organized.
But it does blur the lines between what is public and what is private, right? In terms of a municipality and what it actually is. And so it's I to your point, I do see that point. You know what I mean?
Absolutely.
I don't have the solution for this. I don't know who does have the solution. Nobody clearly does, because it's still an ongoing controversy, right? First, they have to unpack all the shitty politics that are attending to all of this, right? The blaming the previous party and this and that and the other thing.
I would blame the previous party, though, personally.
Okay.
Because otherwise my grandma might disown me.
I don't know enough about the local politics of Andhra, the central government
not worth
there.
Getting into on this.
Yeah, it's not. We're not a political podcast anyway, but we do know that this is a great sacrilege. And look, do better, guys. Do better. That's maybe all I can really say in a fair way.
This cannot ever fly.
This cannot ever fly. And that's really all I have to say. I wanted to talk about it because it is something that's happening, but it's an evolving situation as well, where we're trying to find out what the actual where the actual true culpabilities lie and where the actual solutions may rest as well. So that's all I kind of really have to say about that. Guys, I want to get into it now, getting back to the Yoga Vashishta. This is a very exciting section that I want to talk about because what we're really going to do here is bridge the gap between Bhakti and an Advaita perspective, right? Advaita, as we see it now, feels like there is a sense it is what I refer to as a benign nihilism to it, right? Because it's not really prescriptive. It's really more of a kind of positivist or normatizing view of what reality is, which is everything is just consciousness, right? That's all it is, and that's what we're given with it. But in a story that I'm going to talk about here from the Yoga Vashishta, we kind of see how we can bridge the gap there a little bit, right? And this is the story of, and this is Adi's favorite story, the story of Prahlada, right? And of course, of the Narasimha avatar of Vishnu, right? That the lion man himself who came, and Adi, you love the story of Hiranyakashipu and his son Prahlada. Mm-hmm. Prahlada was a great devotee, a great bhakt of Lord Vishnu, and his father, Hiranyakashipu, has a great beef, no pun intended, perhaps beef pun intended, right? Because his elder brother, Hiranyaksha, was killed by Lord Vishnu, right, in the Varaha avatar, because he had been terrorizing the earth and was basically, he was an environmental eco-terrorist of sorts, correct, right? Yeah. He was like a horrible, like a chemical corporation. You could think of it as like a Koch brother type figure, and basically trying to subsume the earth, you know what I mean, and tormenting Bhumi Devi, as we know her. And of course, Lord Vishnu came in the boar form, took him out, right? And then his younger brother, Hiranyakashipu, has a huge beef against Lord Vishnu. And what does he do? He's persecuting all the bhakts of Lord Vishnu, foremost of which is his son Prahlada. And Prahlada is a highly devoted bhakt of him, and he is saved and rescued. All the bhakts of Lord Vishnu are rescued from him through the form of Narasimha, where he is not a man, not a beast, but both. And he kills him not at day or night, but in between the two at dusk, and not indoors or outdoors, but on the threshold of his home.
The veranda.
Exactly. And he kills him. That's the long and short story of Narasimha, Prahlada, and Hiranyakashipu. So we're talking about the aftermath of this. And what I love is that in the Yoga Vashishta, what we're really seeing is a retelling of so many different stories, right? But they're all retellings of it from an Advaita kind of perspective, of this non-dualist perspective. The Yoga Vashishta itself is a retread of the Balakanda of the Ramayana, right? And a specific section of it, which is right when Vishwamitra arrives at the court to take Rama out on his first mission, if you will, to destroy the demons, interrupting his yajnas. So this is a retelling of the story of Narasimha and Prahlada, but really specifically it gives the aftermath of that story, where Prahlada now reigns over the demons, right? The Asuras. And it's a very fascinating thing, first of all, that the Asuras can also be devotees, right? And it's this is a big difference between the Dharmic phase in Hinduism and what we see in the big three over in the West, right? They have very Manichaean, black and white ideas of good versus evil, whereas things are very much on a continuum here, and they're on the continuum according to the three gunas, actually, more than anything else. The Asuras are more tamasic and rajasic, right? That's their imbalance, right? But you do within that find great devotees. Ravana, as we know, was a great bhakt of Lord Shiva, right? He was half Brahmin, half Rakshas, half Asura, right?
No, half Rakshasa.
Half Rakshasa, right? And I don't know, we can get into, I guess, the kind of taxonomy of Rakshasa versus Asura at some point.
If you want to see that episode, guys, let us know.
Yeah, let us know, actually.
That's a great episode.
It actually is a great... because
there's a deep taxonomy there.
There really is, right? Because then you also have the Devas versus the actual... gods, right? These are celestial
Devas versus Asuras.
Versus Yakshas, and also all these other different classes of celestial beings. Anyway, Prahlada is a hardcore Vishnu bhakt, and what I love about the story in the Yoga Vashishta is that after all this has happened and his father's been killed by Narasimha, he is now reigning over the demons, right, on Earth. And what happens is his devotion to Lord Vishnu just intensify to the point where he is worshiping him externally And then at a certain point, he comes to a more non-dualistic worship. He crosses from a dualistic Dvaita sort of worship of Vishnu into a non-dual devotional state where he realizes his own self to be Vishnu. So he begins to worship the Vishnu that is him and within him. Very fascinating. And in doing so, by crossing over to this more non-dualistic worship, Vishnu himself appears to him, right? In his characteristic God fashion, he appears to him gives him the proper darshana of himself and appears to him in his form as we know, Satyanarayan, with the conch, the discus, the mace. I forget what the fourth thing is, maybe a lotus or something. Yeah. And he comes to Prahlada and he says, okay, listen, you're so devoted. Let me grant you a boon, right? Always with the boons. And Prahlada says, I don't honestly even know what to ask for. Your darshana is, of course, the highest thing anyone could grant. He says, give me the highest boon that you can think of, the infinite thing that you can give me. And Lord Vishnu says, okay, what I'm going to grant you is the boon of self-inquiry. From there, Prahlada engages in really the highest form of worship, self-inquiry. That is the highest form of worship. And through this inquiry, we see him come to the conclusion of all Advaita thought, which is that everything is the undivided, undifferentiated, infinite consciousness of self, right? Self is everything. That is it. And the one thing that he keeps repeating is to say, Brahma as well as a blade of grass is constituted of this. Again, it's an almost atheistic, not even atheistic, but it's a pantheistic view of things, actually, but it is actually ultimately a non-dual view of reality. As we've discussed in previous sections on the Yoga Vashishta, even the gods themselves are constructed of this reality. Even we are all subject to the same thing, right? Which is this undifferentiated, undivided consciousness. And from there, he goes on a sort of tear, a long soliloquy on the nature of self-inquiry, including what I consider to be this hymn. And this is just the beginning of it. O self, free from the mire of ego sense, salutations to you. O self, in whom the fearsome senses and all-consuming mind have attained quiescence, salutations to you. O self, in whom the lotus of bliss has fully blossomed, salutations to you. O self, whose two wings are consciousness and its reflection, and who dwells in the lotus of the heart, salutations to you. O self, the sun that dispels the darkness of ignorance in the heart, salutations to you. O self, the promoter of supreme love and the sustainer of all things in the universe, salutations to you. And he just keeps going on about this. We are worshiping the self here. And to me, this is the great bridge between dualism and non-dualism, between Dvaita and Advaita. And it's through this sort of krama, which I call krama is a term that we use mostly in Tantra, and it means succession, and it is the process. But here we see the succession of the process between bhakti and non-dualistic worship, right? Devotion of the deity, and then ultimately results in the devotion of the self. And that's why it was a great gift from Lord Vishnu. Prahlada's worship of Vishnu was a progression, a succession of worship of him as the ultimate deity apart from himself, then the deity within himself, and that was a precursor to the worship of the self itself. And when a boon was granted by Lord Vishnu, he was finally able to progress to that worship of the self and the self alone. And as, of course, Vashishta explains it to Lord Rama, it was the self of Prahlada that generated in itself devotion to Vishnu. Prahlada obtained from Vishnu, who was his own self, the boon of self-inquiry, and through such self-inquiry attained self-knowledge. At times, one attains self-knowledge through self-inquiry undertaken through self-effort. At times, this self-effort manifests as devotion to Vishnu, who is also the self, and thus one attains enlightenment. So Vashishta then goes on, basically, to say that the cult of devotion to Vishnu has been founded with the intention of possibly inducing those people who have turned away from the study of scriptures, from the self-effort and from self-inquiry to do something good. Determined and persistent self-effort is considered the best. In its absence, other forms of worship are prescribed. If there's complete mastery of the senses, of what use is worship? And if there's no mastery of the senses, of what use is worship? Right? Very fascinating to me. And if you are successful in this, here's a final line. If you are successful in this, you have attained perfection. And if not, you are no more than a wild donkey. Sorry, guys. Listen, what he is kind of saying here is that actually worship itself, religion itself, theism itself is kind of retarded, okay? And we are all retarded, actually. This is the thing. We're all subject underneath You can think of ourselves as one consciousness, which is actually indwelling within all of us. We're not there yet, right? We say this in the Bhagavad Gita as well. Krishna says, listen, my impersonal form is difficult to worship.
Yeah.
That's why you should start with the Bhakti, right? Start with the Bhakti. There's all these different paths towards it, right? Inquiry, philosophy, yoga, meditation, impersonal worship, worship of the self, essentially. And then, of course, Bhakti. And you start with Bhakti, right? That is the most important thing to do because we are all retarded. Okay. And this process of succession is deconditioning ourselves of this retardation, essentially. I'm sorry, is that not a proper word to use? Maybe not. You already know what it is here. Okay. And that's what we're doing. It's a constant deconditioning of ourselves. And we start by worshiping the external deity. And through that, we start to realize the deity is within us. And then beyond that, we start to worship the supreme consciousness that exists as the self, the ultimate self. And that's what Hinduism is really about, actually. But no matter where you start, if you begin as a bhakti and you end as a bhakti, as a bhakt, right? That's also fine, right? Because it's all about the dissolution of the ego into the deity.
Yeah.
And ultimately, you're reaching that same goal, right? Of dissolving of the ego to realize the true self. Heady stuff, right? But to me, I feel like this is really important because we're understanding, well, what is the connection between bhakti and this kind of ultimate, the one true form of worship, which is self-inquiry and worship of the self. And it's not worship of the self like, I am God and I am the almighty, most powerful. That's not what it's about, right? It's not a form of narcissism, right? It is a solipsistic approach, though, however, once you realize that all is divine, right? That we're all made up of this Brahman, of this ultimate consciousness. To me, it's fascinating. It's an important bridge that we cross when we're understanding Advaita and how it is an actual religious school of religiosity or spirituality, right? But this is the place where you go beyond all rituals. You go beyond all that, and it's a pure meditation. It's a pure self-inquiry, pure contemplation. After he gets into the self-inquiry, the demons and everybody's getting a little bit like, whoa, what's up with Prahlada now? And Vishnu has to come again and intervene, and he blows the conch to awaken him out of this other state, right? Out of this non-dualistic state, to be like, hey, listen, this isn't the time to just completely dissolve and relinquish your duties, right? Again, inaction. Is instead to continue on with your duties as the regent of the asuras, right? And continue your dominion over earth under this asura reign, because the time of the cosmic dissolution is not yet here. And thus we all have to participate in the lila of Maya, right? And that to me is still something that requires a lot of unpacking as well and a lot of thought and understanding, right? But it does make a certain sense, right? Everything is lila. This is all actually a sort of divine play that's being played out and carried out in every yug and every yuga, right? He says to him, he's like, the time of cosmic dissolution is not now. So there's no point in giving up your body in this way or giving up whatever this materiality that has been formed through the power of Maya is like. This stuff is still here, and thus you still have your duties to attend to, right? But the way to attend to all duties, as we know, all the way from the Bhagavad Gita into the Yoga Vashishta, is one does so through a renunciate position, right? Through Tyaga, through all of that stuff. You do everything non-volitionally. Everything is non-volitional. God, there's an amazing quote. It's a Taoist text, actually. This is from the Tao. Do you mind if I read it? Can you remain unmoving till the right action arises by itself? Wow. This is Dharma 101, really. You know what I mean? But again, this is the whole thing, and we talked about this a little bit last time. The desires are of two kinds. There's the true desire, which is just what your actual impulse is, but then there's volitional desire, and those are the things where you're generating karmas. Right, but it's through non-volitional desire. That's really doing your duty, right? Can you remain unmoving until the right action arises by itself? Can you remain unmoving until the right action arises by itself? Very heavy thing to say, but to me, it's absolutely something straight out of the Yoga Vashishta. Things happen spontaneously. They happen through the course of Dharma itself, the larger Dharma that is carrying us forward in our duties, right? And us living in accordance with those duties. Non-volitional action. And that's what Lord Vishnu tells Prahlada, essentially, is like, you need to just be the renunciate, but don't relinquish your duties, right?
Yeah.
Summing it up, this is the bridge between bhakti and Advaita. This is how the two are linked, and we should never abandon the path of Bhakti, actually, on some level or another. It is required of us. We use Maya to go beyond Maya. We use the mind to go beyond the mind into pure consciousness. It is not an easy task, but it is a necessary task, and it is a rewarding task, because all the pleasures we can ever possibly think or imagine to experience are nothing, right? They're things that actually just create more desires, right? One thinks that by satisfying an urge or a craving for something, it's going to satisfy it. No, all it does is it makes the box of desires bigger, where you're just constantly wanting more, right? Aristotle referred to this as a leaky cask, right? And that's all our material desires are. It's just feeding into and creating more and more desires. The true desire is that recognition of the self as the ultimate reality of pure consciousness. Whew. Moving on.
Beautiful.
Moving on. Let's talk about it, guys. I want to respond to some comments that we've been getting, specifically on TikTok. Our clip about the Hanuman Murti in Texas really blew up there. We got like 45,000 views. A lot of people are very supportive. Really just amazing comments overall and in general. A couple different things that I kind of want to just talk about in a free-flowing way a little bit. Some of the comments that we were getting. Now, first of all, I want to say, are the most ostentatious displays of our worship, are those my favorite things about being a Hindu? No, not necessarily, although I love Hindu aesthetics, right? Remember, as I said before, religion is about aesthetics and philosophy. That's the dual thing. Song and lyrics, right? Music and lyrics. That's what it's about. And so the aesthetics are very important, and you can't deny this in any religion, really, right? This is the dual nature of all religions. Maybe I don't love the most ostentatious displays of anything. I will definitely want to go visit this Murti, though, and pay homage to Bajrangbali, of course, right? To me, he's just the Chad. He is the Bhakt. He is the witty one. I love Hanumanji. But there were some interesting comments in there. One of the comments was, hey, wouldn't it be more dharmic to use that money towards the statue to instead serve the community and feed the poor? And my answer to that is no. No, it wouldn't necessarily, right? Seva is a part of Hindu religion, right? And Hindu religiosity. And you see it throughout all dharmic faiths, but there's some Sikhi as well. You go to Langar, it's an amazing service that you do.
They're the kings of Seva.
They're the kings of Seva. Truly the true kings of Seva. I mean, Sikhi is such a magnificent faith and very Advaitin as well in its own right. And a great way of resolving a lot of issues that were coming up after the Muslims invaded India, right? And what are we doing here, right? It emerged out of this almost post-apocalyptic wasteland, right? Anyway, I don't want to delve too much into Sikhi. But listen, we can't forget that the main focus of religion and our religion is worship, right? Deconditioning of the self, bhakti, so we can get to that place of a non-dualistic self-inquiry, right? Worship is everything. That's what we're about. We're about worshiping. So seva is important and it is part of it. But one should not assume that just because the temple decided to build this magnificent statue to Bajrangbali, that they're not also doing service to their community as well, right? We know for every Hindu temple I've ever belonged to does this kind of service as well. But we can't forget that these are places of worship. It's not a charity. We're not a bunch of Jesuits, right? That's not what this temple is about, right? The focus of the temple is worship. That's what it's about. The second point some people were bringing up who are a bit more antagonistic was, hey, is it a good thing to erect a big statue of Hanumanji in a Christian land? That makes me want to barf, okay? First of all, this is a secular country. America is a secular country. We are free to worship as we want to worship, and whatever form that worship takes. Hindus are not going to be protesting them erecting a large statue to Jesus, right? Or you don't see Hindus going and protesting mosques in America, right? Because no, this is a purely secular land, okay? Like, I'm sorry, but if you want to play that game, India is a dharmic land. Is it right to have however many thousands of churches or hundreds of churches that exist there, or thousands of mosques that exist in India? I'm sorry, if those things are there, those are things that come from a completely different land, right? A mosque is a place of Muslim worship. Muslim worship is really, you learn Arabic, right? You have to worship in Arabic. You have to literally pray in the direction of Saudi Arabia and Mecca, right? It is in a sense a worship of Arabism in some sense. It could be interpreted as that. And I'm not shitting on Muslims at all. I'm just trying to describe what is the historical basis for this religion, right? I'm not saying there aren't deeper depths to the religion or the spirituality or anything at all. It's not about knocking it. But there's hundreds of mosques and thousands of mosques in India. The biggest mosque in all of Asia is in India, or the second biggest mosque, I think. So no, that is not a correct viewpoint to take about Texas. It's not a Christian land. It's never been a Christian land, actually. If it's the farthest thing from a Christian land, it began as, I don't know, Cherokee land, or I don't know what the indigenous tribes of Texas were, but they had a more paganistic, earthy religion, right? That has nothing to do with Christianity at all. So just because you have conquered and you want to be like, hey, we're Christians here, we're a conquering religion, sorry, that's not what it is. And especially in America, this is a secular country that is divided church from state entirely. It's not a theocratic entity. Doesn't matter. Okay, Hanumanji is as welcome there as Jesus, Muhammad, or any of the Ojibwe spirits or whatever it is. You know what I mean? Voodoo, Santeria, whatever. It's all welcome here at this point, whether you like it or not. This has been Shakti Punch. Thank you guys so much. Remember, we have a Patreon. We'd love if you subscribed. Remember to subscribe here on YouTube. Click that subscribe button. Click that like button. Comment. Let us know your thoughts. We love you guys. Thank you so much. Om Namah Shivaya.